Updated 10 halves roster moves made by MLB clubs in August are sometimes made with an eye toward post-season roster eligibility and off-season roster flexibility. With that in mind, here are the 2018 MLB post-season roster eligibility and draft-excluded player rules. MLB Rule 40 Post-Season Roster Eligibility rules. A club's post-season eligibility list is established at midnight Eastern on August 31st. A club's active list, 25-man roster, must be submitted to the MLB Commissioner prior to the start of the first game of each postseason series, wildcard game, LDS, LCS, and World Series. A club's active list can be tweaked, prior to the start of the first game of each series, WC, LDS, LCS, and WS1. A player who received a suspension for violation of the MLB-MLB-PA Joint Drug Prevention and Treatment Program. Player tested positive for a prohibited substance prior to the start of spring training, during the regular season, or during a postseason series, wild card, LDS, LCS, or World Series, is ineligible to play in any MLB or minor league postseason games or series in that season, even if the player has completed serving the suspension. 2. Any player on the disqualified list, ineligible list, voluntary retired list, or restricted list, for any reason other than being placed on administrative leave pending investigation of a possible violation of the MLB-MLB-PA Joint Domestic Violence, Sexual Assault, and Child Abuse Policy or extended bereavement, family medical emergency leave, as of midnight Eastern, on August 31st, or who is placed on the disqualified list. An eligible list, voluntary retired list, or restricted list, for any reason other than being placed on administrative leave pending investigation of a possible violation of the MLB-MLB-PA Joint Domestic Violence, Sexual Assault, and Child Abuse Policy or extended bereavement, family medical emergency leave, anytime after midnight Eastern, on August 31st is ineligible to be included on a postseason eligibility list that's Season 3. All other players on a club's MLB reserve list, 40-man roster, MLB 60-day DL, and military list prior to midnight Eastern on August 31st are automatically placed on a club's postseason eligibility list and are eligible to be included on a postseason series active list, 25-man roster, but a player on an MLB 60-day DL who otherwise would be eligible to be included on a postseason eligibility list is not eligible to be included until the player has spent at least 60 days on the DL, and a player on the MLB 60-day DL is not eligible to play in a postseason series until the player has spent at least 60 days on the DL and the player has been reinstated from the 60-day DL. Cubs 2018 Postseason Eligibility List, updated September 28, 2018, 40 players * bats or throws left. So they are not eligible to be included on the Cubs' 2018 postseason eligibility list unless the player replaces one of the 40 players on the Cubs' postseason eligibility list who is disabled due to injury or illness. As of 9/19, it would include Yu Darvish, Justin Hancock, Brandon Morrow, and Drew Smyly. Note 2 of Mark Zagunis was on the Cubs' postseason eligibility list on 8/31, but he was removed from the 40-man roster on 9/4 when he was placed on the MLB 60-day DL, right shoulder inflammation, and because he will not be eligible to be reinstated from the 60-day DL until after the World Series, he cannot be replaced on the Cubs' postseason eligibility list by another player. See Note 1 above. 4. A player on a postseason eligibility list at midnight Eastern on August 31st must remain on his club's MLB reserve list, MLB 60-day DL, and/or military list continuously throughout the remainder of the MLB regular season and postseason in order to be automatically included on his club's postseason eligibility list. If a player is sent outright to the minors after midnight Eastern on August 31st, he is no longer automatically eligible to be included on a postseason eligibility list. 5. 26th man must be a catcher, may, with approval of the MLB Commissioner, be listed on a club's active list for the LDS, LCS, or World Series as a replacement for a catcher who is suffering from an acute concussion. The catcher who suffered the concussion would be eligible to return to his club's active list after 7 days, even if it is prior to the conclusion of the series, at which point the 26th man would be deactivated. 6. A post-season eligible player who is placed on the bereavement, family medical emergency list or on the paternity list during a post-season series can, with approval of the MLB Commissioner, be replaced by another player on the club's post-season eligibility list. A pitcher must replace a pitcher and a position player must replace a position player, but it is not necessary for a catcher to replace a catcher, an infielder to replace an infielder, or an outfielder to replace an outfielder, as long as the absent player is reinstated after no more than 7 days, for a player on the bereavement, family medical emergency list, or after no more than 3 days, for a player on the paternity list. If the series ends before the player is reinstated, he will automatically be reinstated prior to the next series, even if he has not returned to his club. Note: the absent player is not eligible to be replaced during a series if the player is a pitcher who has started a game in the series unless he has not pitched in a game for at least 3 days. 7. An injured post-season eligible player can, with the approval of the MLB Commissioner, be replaced on his club's post-season eligibility list by a player, regardless of position, who was on an active list, reserve list, 60-day DL, or military list of a minor league affiliate from that organization prior to midnight Eastern on August 31st, or by a player who was on the club's MLB reserve list, 40-man roster, MLB 60-day DL, or military list prior to midnight Eastern on August 31st, but who was subsequently sent outright to the minors. In the case of a player who is sent outright to the minors after August 31st, the player must remain on a reserve list of a minor league affiliate from that organization continuously throughout the remainder of the MLB regular season and postseason in order to be eligible to replace an injured postseason eligible player. 8. A minor league player who replaces an injured player on the postseason eligibility list must have his contract selected and be placed on the club's MLB reserve list 40-man roster before he can be placed on the club's postseason eligibility list. If the club's MLB reserve list 40-man roster is full, a player must be removed, traded, released, or sent outright to the minors from the club's MLB reserve list to make room for the replacement player. Note: a player cannot be placed on the MLB 60-day DL after the conclusion of the MLB regular season, so placing an injured player on the MLB 60-day DL during the postseason to make room on the club's MLB reserve list 40-man roster for a postseason minor league replacement player is not an option. 9. A postseason eligible player who is injured during a postseason series, LDS, LCS, or World Series, can, with the approval of the MLB Commissioner, be replaced during the series by another player on the club's postseason eligibility list, or by a player who is on an active list, reserve list, 60-day DL, or military list of a minor league affiliate from that organization prior to midnight Eastern on August 31st, or by a player who was on the club's MLB reserve list, 40-man roster, MLB 60-day DL, or military list prior to midnight Eastern on August 31st, but who was subsequently sent outright to the minors. In the case of a player who is sent outright to the minors after August 31st, the player must remain on a reserve list of a minor league affiliate from that organization continuously throughout the remainder of the MLB regular season and postseason in order to be eligible to replace an injured postseason eligible player. An injured player replaced during a postseason series is ineligible to be reinstated to his club's active list 25-man roster for the balance of that series and the next series, LCS or World Series. Also, a pitcher must replace a pitcher and a position player must replace a position player. However, it is not necessary for a catcher to replace a catcher, an infielder to replace an infielder, or an outfielder to replace an outfielder. Note: if the injured player suffered an acute concussion, the injured player is eligible to be reinstated to his club's active list after 7 days even if the next postseason series is still in progress. MLB Rule 6, Draft-Excluded Player Rules. A draft-excluded player is any minor league player who has accrued less than 3 years of MLB service time and who is eligible for selection in the MLB Rule 5 draft, whose contract is selected, and who is added to an MLB reserve list 40-man roster between August 15th and the Rule 5 draft. 1. A draft-excluded player can be non-tendered on 12 halves, released, or traded at any time, but he cannot be sent to the minors by optional assignment beginning with the conclusion of the MLB regular season up until 20 days prior to MLB opening day. 2. A draft-excluded player can be sent outright to the minors only if outright assignment waivers are requested no later than 2 p.m. Eastern, on the fifth day following the final game of the World Series, and if a draft-excluded player has not outrighted to the minors prior to the Rule 5 draft, the player cannot be designated for assignment or sent outright to the minors any earlier than 20 days prior to the start of the MLB regular season. Cubs with Post-2018 Rule 6 draft-excluded status, last updated September 22, 2018. Terrence Gore, of Taylor Davis, C1B Mike Freeman, INF Allen Webster, RHP.